Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. As Pakistan celebrates its 74th Independence Day today, President Arif Alvi says Islamabad will continue to highlight Indian oppression and siege in occupied Kashmir as the ambassador of Kashmiris on all international forums. In his message, Prime Minister Imran Khan said Pakistan in past 7 decades confronted multiple internal and external challenges with resilience. Pakistan is holding festivities with social distancing protocols today. Kabul says it has freed 80 of the 400 Taliban prisoners whose release was approved by last week's lawyer Jirga. The National Security Council says the government has taken the step to speed up efforts for intra-Afghan talks and a lasting nationwide ceasefire. Israel says its warplanes have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip for the 5th time this week. The Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas aerial defense post and underground infrastructure in response to last week's explosive balloons. No casualties have been reported from the raid so far. News in detail coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back now. As Pakistan celebrates its 74th Independence Day today, President Arif Alvi says Islamabad will continue to highlight Indian oppression and siege in occupied Kashmir as the ambassador of Kashmiris on all international forums. Addressing the flag-hoisting ceremony in Islamabad, Alvi said Prime Minister Imran Khan's smart lockdown turned out to be the most effective strategy in the world to fight COVID-19. In his message, Prime Minister Khan said Pakistan in the past 7 decades confronted multiple internal and external challenges with resilience. Pakistan is holding festivities with social distancing protocols today. The celebration started with 31-gun salute in the federal capital and 21-gun salute in the provincial headquarters. The day marks a renewed commitment to the vision of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of the country. In Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, people are celebrating Independence Day as Thanksgiving Day. Meanwhile, to stop Kashmiris from celebrating Pakistan's Independence Day, New Delhi has intensified its curfew in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Witnesses say occupation forces have increased patrolling and monitoring activities. Officials say a random search of vehicles is being carried out near Sher-e-Kashmir Cricket Stadium. The stadium is the venue for the main event of India's Independence Day tomorrow. This will be the first Independence Day ceremony in the valley since it was illegally annexed and besieged by India on the 5th of August last year. The division of British India into 2 independent dominion states, Pakistan and India, ended crown rule in the subcontinent in the 1947. But the unattended boundary dispute between the 2 countries have resulted into a complex situation. Within months, India and Pakistan were embroiled in a war over Kashmir, the consequences of which still affect millions of people today. This report has details.
73 years ago, Pakistan and India emerged as 2 independent countries on the map of the world. However, what is described as an unfinished agenda of the British India's partition, the territorial disputes such as the Kashmir issue have become a festering wound.
Across the LOC are 2 nuclear powers, and Kashmir has become a flashpoint. God forbid, if things spin out of control, the world will be sucked into that situation.
Over the past 7 decades, both Pakistan and India have fought several wars without finding a durable and acceptable solution to a problem that should have been justly settled 73 years ago.
The colonial master wanted to teach you a lesson because you asked for a separate homeland. There is an unfinished agenda of your independence because the Muslim majority areas were to join hands with Pakistan and become a whole country. And unfortunately, the colonial masters of that time, what they did was that they deliberately left a few things in limbo.
Colonization of a different kind took place. So it was not independence of freedom, complete independence of freedom. Nehru family conspired with Mountbatten, and Gurdaspur, which was awarded to Pakistan logically, on the morning of the 15th, it was part of India. Had Gurdaspur district not gone to India, Kashmir would have, Indian access to Kashmir would have been probably limited.
With the pending UN Security Council resolutions, a referendum in Kashmir remains a moral imperative, besides being a democratic necessity. Experts believe the Kashmir dispute has now become the nuclear flashpoint, with deadly ramifications for the whole world. Reporting for Indus News, Isa Naqvi, Islamabad.
Pakistan has conferred Nishan-e-Pakistan, the highest civil award of the country, on the veteran Kashmiri Hurriyat leader Sayyid Ali Gilani. President Arif Alvi bestowed the award to honor Gilani's decades of struggle for Kashmiri's right to self-determination. On Gilani's behalf, the award was received by a Hurriyat leader in a ceremony held in Independence Day ceremony in Islamabad. The president paid rich tribute to the leader for his resilience and sacrifices. He praised Gilani's role in exposing Indian atrocities and human rights violations in the valley. The Pakistan government has also expressed concern over the unjustified house arrest of the veteran leader, who is in frail health. Minorities have played a key role in the progress of Pakistan since its inception on the 14th of August 1947. Be it Hindus, Sikhs, Parsis or other ethnic communities, their role in the development of the country is very vital. More in this report.
Pakistan is celebrating 73 years of its existence, and through it all, the country has stood tall with its diverse religious communities. With an increased role of minorities towards a united nation, the country has pushed aside the scars of partition.
Different Sikh guys working in different fields, like mostly you can see also in Parliament House, they are working as a politician. Some people are working in a medical field. So, of course, you can see an education department. I'm proud to be Pakistani and I love my country. Pakistan Zindabad.
Assistant Priest Father Kamran Daniel draws attention to the role of Christians towards creating an independent Pakistan.
From the creation of Pakistan, the largest province, which is Punjab, it got separated from Indian Punjab because of the vote of the Christians. There was a slogan, "Jo mangega Pakistan jayega wo kabristan." A Christian parliamentarian raised the slogan, "Seene mein goli khayenge, Pakistan banayenge." Very few people know that this slogan was raised by a Christian.
Non-Muslims constitute about 3.7% of the total population in Pakistan. Under the constitution of the country, minorities are granted the freedom of worship, right to equality and non-discrimination. As Pakistan turns 73 years old today, people of all religions and faiths continue to live in peace and harmony. Reporting for Indus News, Manahil Ahmed, Islamabad.
Pakistan has developed an organized and successful national nuclear safety system that is consistent with global standards and regulations. It has always been a responsible member of the global nuclear community. More details in this report.
Pakistan has sailed through the toughest conditions since its independence, but never compromised on its national defense. From its military modernization efforts till becoming a nuclear power on the 28th of May 1998, it has always shown a great responsibility, and the journey goes on.
Since independence, Pakistan has always, security has been a major concern vis-à-vis India because of a number of factors. One obviously was the Kashmir dispute. India obviously wanted to disturb this strategic balance in the region. We would try and take actions to correct it. For instance, in 1974, when India conducted its first nuclear test in violation of the international nuclear regime, we also started making preparations for our own nuclear program.
Jilani said Pakistan has never been part of an arms race in the region, but the country keeps a full-spectrum deterrence and is fully capable of responding to every sort of aggression.
Pakistan obviously does not want to enter into an arms race with India because we would like our precious resources to be spent on the welfare of the people. But at the same time, we have to maintain and we have to ensure that this strategic balance is maintained. We are fully geared to meet any aggression from any outside force. Besides this full spectrum deterrence that we have introduced in our security paradigm.
Dr. Adil Sultan, an expert on nuclear program, welcomed the global appreciation of Pakistan's nukes security protocols.
Where the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, which is a credible and recognized entity, they often visit to Pakistan, review our civilian nuclear facilities, and we have always been graded very high. In fact, Pakistan's nuclear safety standards are projected to be one of the best. We are operating 5 nuclear power plants now, 4 in Chashma and 1 in Karachi, and without any accident. So that speaks of Pakistan's credential itself.
A US study on worldwide nuclear materials security for 2020 has said Pakistan is the most improved country after increasing its overall score by 7 points. On the whole, Pakistan was ranked 19th with 47 points, while India was ranked 1 place below at 20th spot with 41 points. Indigenous development programs and foreign acquisitions are opening new eras for Pakistan in defense cooperation worldwide due to its peaceful no-war policy. Reporting for Indus News, Sumaira Khan, Islamabad.
Now, in other stories, Kabul says it has freed 80 of the 400 high-value Taliban prisoners whose release was approved by last week's lawyer Jirga. The Afghan National Security Council said the government has fulfilled the verdict of the Jirga to speed up efforts for direct talks and a lasting nationwide ceasefire. Spokesman for the National Security Council, Javed Faisal, said the prisoners were released from Pul-e-Charkhi prison in Kabul. He said the prisoners were released despite reservations voiced by US, France and Australia over some of the prisoners. The Grand Assembly last week approved the release of the remaining prisoners, a step that was seen as a key push for the start of the intra-Afghan talks. So far, the government has released 4,680 prisoners and an additional 500 that were not on the Taliban list. Moving on, Israel says its warplanes have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip for the 5th time this week. The Defense Ministry says it struck Hamas aerial defense posts and underground infrastructure in retaliation to last week's incendiary balloon attacks. No casualties have been reported from the raid so far. The raids come after the UAE and Israel signed a peace deal to normalize ties between the two countries. The Israeli army frequently organizes airstrikes on the border areas where it claims explosive kites and balloons are prepared. The Gaza Strip has been reeling under a crippling Israeli blockade by air, land and sea since 2007. Meanwhile, in a related development, Palestine says the UAE has betrayed Jerusalem and the Palestinian cause by striking a deal with Israel on the normalization of ties. In a statement, President Mahmoud Abbas said the Palestinian leadership rejects the announcement. His remarks come after the UAE and Israel reached a peace deal with United States mediation. The agreement was sealed in a phone call between US President Donald Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and Abu Dhabi Crown Prince Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. Under the deal, Israel has agreed to suspend its plans to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. But Netanyahu later said the seizure plans were only delayed, not suspended. Condemning the agreement, Abbas recalled the Palestinian envoy to UAE.
The Palestinian leadership announces that it rejects and denounces the surprise trilateral UAE, Israeli and US announcement about a full normalization of relations between the Israeli occupation state and the United Arab Emirates in return for a claimed calm and temporary suspension of the annexation plot of the Palestinian lands and Israeli sovereignty over it.
Well, Abbas also urged the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to call an urgent meeting and reject the deal. Now, the US brokered peace deal between the UAE and Israel has drawn mixed reactions from the global community. Egypt, United Kingdom and France supported the move, while Iran, Turkey, Libya and Jordan expressed their reservations over the pact. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres welcomed the move, hoping it will create an opportunity for Israeli and Palestinian leaders to re-engage in negotiations. France also welcomed Israel's decision to suspend its planned annexation of the occupied West Bank, calling it a positive step. Meanwhile, Iran called the deal dangerous and illegitimate. Turkey said history and the region's people will never forgive the hypocritical behavior of the UAE in agreeing on a deal with Israel. The pact, called the Abraham Agreement, secures normalization of ties between Abu Dhabi and Tel Aviv. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. In Yemen, the Saudi-led coalition says it downed a drone and 2 ballistic missiles launched by the Houthi rebels towards Saudi Arabia. In a statement, coalition spokesperson Turki Al-Malki said a booby-trapped drone was aimed at civilian infrastructure in Khamis Mushat city. It said the rebels continue to breach the Stockholm Agreement and the Hodeidah ceasefire. Al-Malki said the Houthis are using the Hodeidah governorate as a launch site. It said the actions of rebels are a credible threat to regional and international security. The spokesperson said the coalition will continue to take proper measures to confront hostile and terrorist acts by the Houthis. Now, the UN Security Council has started voting on a US bid to indefinitely extend an arms embargo on Iran under the 2015 nuclear deal. UN diplomats say the results of the extension vote will be announced after 24 hours. The 15-member council has been operating virtually amid the coronavirus pandemic, so states have a day to cast their vote. The 13-year-old arms embargo is due to expire in October under a deal among Iran, Russia, China, Germany, UK, France and the US. In 2016, Washington opted out of the agreement and reimposed some sanctions on Tehran. On Tuesday, the US slashed its draft resolution to just 4 paragraphs in a bid to gain more council support. The 2 veto powers, Russia and China, earlier opposed an extension of the arms ban on Tehran. A top US diplomat says the Federal Bureau of Investigation will join a probe into last week's explosion in Beirut, which killed close to 200 people. Under Secretary for Political Affairs David Hale said the Bureau was invited by Lebanese authorities. On a tour of a demolished Beirut neighborhood, is that Lebanon needed economic and fiscal reforms to make sure things like this never happen again. Hale also said the FBI will help answer questions about the circumstances that led up to the explosion. Reiterating Washington's support for Beirut, he said this is one of many ways that America is extending its hand to the Lebanese people. Foreign countries have made clear they will not provide funds to Lebanon without action on long-demanded reforms. In Lebanon, officials say 60 historic buildings in Beirut are at the risk of collapse following last week's devastating port explosion. While the UN's cultural agency said has vowed to lead a global campaign for the restoration and recovery of the city's heritage. UNESCO Assistant Director General for Cultural Ernesto Otone said the global community has lent strong support to Lebanon in the aftermath of this tragedy. UNESCO quoted Lebanese officials as saying at least 8,000 buildings were affected. Many are concentrated in the historic quarter of Gemaizeh and Mar Mikhail, known for their nightlife. It said museums, art galleries and religious sites were among the damaged structures. The Beirut explosion killed 177 people, injured thousands, and blanketed the city hub with debris and broken glasses. Now, 8 people have been killed in floods following torrential rains in eastern Sudan's Kassala town. Local officials say 23 villages and over 8,500 people have been affected by the disaster. He underlined that urgent aid is needed for the region. Earlier, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reported that hundreds of homes had been destroyed due to the floods. The OCHA said the disaster has forced the displacement of thousands of people across the region. Now, the United States has reported 1,131 deaths from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, taking the toll to over 167,000, with more than 5 million cases. The global number of deaths has crossed 755,000, with over 20.9 million infected. More details in this report.
The new coronavirus is tumbling records, overwhelming healthcare systems, and rolling back hopes of the economic revival in the Americas. In the U.S., President Donald Trump is pushing for schools to reopen regardless of the rising death toll. Trump has threatened to divert federal funding away from schools if they don't comply. While in Latin America, as fatalities and cases of COVID-19 surge, new vaccine agreements by regional countries have given a flicker of hope. But Brazil's handling of the pandemic has garnered criticism worldwide, with the country torn between saving lives and its economy.
We go on with life. We cannot get scared by the pandemic. We have to be careful, take care of the elderly because they are more vulnerable to the virus, and to go on with life. I have always said, and I repeat this here, we have 2 major problems ahead, that is the virus and unemployment. Both should be taken care of responsibly and at the same time.
The resurgence of the virus in Germany, France, Spain, and Italy has forced the countries to retreat their easing of travel restrictions. UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the government will be ruthless over its quarantine rules, even with the countries like France. Australia's COVID-19 nightmare has finally started showing signs of slowing down as number of new cases dwindle. Meanwhile, re-emergence of the disease in New Zealand has prompted fresh lockdowns and search for patient zero in trying to contain the virus once more. But the government officials say panic and hysteria is not the solution.
The problem is the virus. It is not people. People are the solution. We need to remember that the cause of this worldwide COVID-19 pandemic and the response in New Zealand and globally is this new virus. There is no blame or stigma attached to anyone having COVID-19, and we should treat each other as we would want to be treated, with dignity and respect.
In China, experts have found traces of coronavirus in imported food from Brazil and Ecuador. The revelation disproves World Health Organization's claim that food cannot contribute to the spread of the infectious disease.
Moreover, in India, 1,007 people lost their lives to COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, with the death toll crossing 48,000. More than 64,000 people tested positive overnight, with the nationwide tally crossing 2.4 million. The Ministry of Health and Family Welfare says there are over 661,000 active cases in the country. India is the 3rd worst affected country in the world after the US and Brazil. Now, Pakistan's COVID-19 curve has flattened, with no spike in cases reported for almost 2 weeks now. 14 people have lost their lives to the virus in the past 24 hours, raising the toll to 6,153. The Health Ministry said 629 cases were reported overnight as the tally crossed 287,000. The ministry said over 265,000 people have recovered from the virus so far. It said there are nearly 16,000 active cases in the country, among which 774 are in a critical condition. Sindh remains the worst-hit province with over 125,000 infections, while Punjab has reported nearly 95,000 cases. Vietnam's health ministry says it will buy Russian COVID-19 vaccine as the country reports new outbreak of cases after months. State media reported the health ministry will continue to work to develop its own vaccine soon. New cases of coronavirus have emerged in Vietnam's Da Nang region and are linked to tourism. Vietnam has reported a total of 911 infections with 21 deaths. Prime Minister Nguyen Xuan Phuc says the risk of wider contagion is very high and the next few days are critical. In business stories now, the US says it's satisfied with China's progress in meeting commitments to purchase US goods in Phase 1 trade deal. White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow said despite the ongoing tensions with Beijing, both countries are progressing well over the Phase 1 trade deal. Kudlow said Beijing is now buying over 40% of US commodity exports compared to about 20% in the baseline year of 2017. He said the jump in imports is providing a boost to American agriculture and farm sector. The U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and China's Vice Premier Liu He are set to hold the first semi-annual review of the deal on Saturday. Despite the encouraging signs, Beijing is well behind the promised target of $77 billion increase in imports this year due to the coronavirus pandemic. Airbnb says it's restricting the ability of people under 25 in Britain, France and Spain from renting entire homes via its platform. The move has been introduced to reduce unauthorized parties and ensure safety. Airbnb said people under 25 years old with less than 3 positive ratings will be banned from renting entire homes close to where they live. It said the company will test the new rule in the 3 European countries only. The company also said those with 3 positive reviews and no negative reviews are not subject to this restriction. Since last year, Airbnb has been cracking down as massive parties have caused problems with neighbors in certain communities. In football, RB Leipzig beat Atletico Madrid 2-1 at the Jose Alvalade Stadium in one of the UEFA Champions League quarterfinals. The victory continues Leipzig's meteoric rise as they reach their first UCL semi-final just 11 years after their formation. The German club took the lead in the 51st minute through Dani Olmo. The goal prompted Atleti boss Diego Simeone to introduce Joao Felix, who scored a penalty to level the contest in the 71st minute. The Germans snatched victory with 2 minutes from time as Tyler Adams deflected shots nestled into the net-beating goalkeeper Jan Oblak. Leipzig will face French champions Paris Saint-Germain in the semi-final with a place in the August 23rd final at stake. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the world. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.